When George W. Bush announced that the United States had begun military action back in Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001, which was in response to the retaliation of the 9/11 attacks orchestrated by Al Qaeda, um, he emphasized that the mission would also focus on providing humanitarian aid to the citizens of Afghanistan. The oppressed people of Afghanistan will know the generosity of America and the allies, he explained, as we strike military targets. We will also drop food, medicine, and supplies. The hypocrisy of a military strike, framed as a humanitarian mission, was on full display. Now, for those of us who could immediately see through Bush's bullshit and his malignant American exceptionalism, the global war on terror epitomized the toxic nature of America's culture of political hypocrisy, and it all seems quaint now. Now, today, we live in a world where chanting "lock her up" at Hillary Clinton for her handling of sensitive documents runs in tandem with outrage over an FBI seizure of classified documents is un-American, where unsubstantiated concerns over election fraud are best handled by attempting to overthrow the democratic process, and where you chant "Blue Lives Matter" except during the January 6th Klan insurrection or when you attack the FBI, and where invoking the Fifth Amendment means a person is definitely guilty except when you do it a lot, and where you call for bipartisan unity on one day and then you stoke party division the next. It's actually kind of fucking exhausting to try to listen even to the best of the highlights of the Trump-era hypocrisy. As columnist Dan Cale writes, since the election of Trump, GOP hypocrisy has become strategic. Now, for some scholars, the Bush-style hypocrisy of the war on terror is considered indispensable for the functioning of the world order. In fact, the University of Cambridge professor David Runciman argues that politics isn't possible without hypocrisy, and for the Machiavelli expert Ruth Grant, hypocrisy is essential to politics because a political life and a moral life are simply incompatible. Now, for others, hypocrisy threatens democracy because, as political science professor Austin Sherratt puts it, hypocrisy erodes trust and it breeds cynicism. And for Sherratt, Trump's extreme and excessive hypocrisy poses a fucking danger to the future of the U.S. democracy because he has normalized it, and thus far he has not been fucking held accountable for any of his crimes. He has been a master of saying one thing and then doing the exact opposite of what he claims he's going to do. He has held up others to ridicule and then done the very things for which he shamed them. And that's just one thing. And whether or not you justify hypocrisy in politics, you have to admit that the Trump-style hypocrisy is entirely different from previous examples. And sure, Thomas Jefferson wrote this, all men are created equal, while unashamedly owning slaves. Lyndon Johnson said we will seek no wider war in reference to Vietnam, and then did just that. Richard Nixon said, I am not a crook until the Watergate scandal broke. Bill Clinton stated that he never had sex with Monica Lewinsky when he actually in reality he did. But not one of the above examples of hypocritical presidents comes even remotely close to the hypocrisy of the former squatter Trump. Now, Trump hasn't been just a hyper-hypocrite. He hasn't just fucking mastered it. He has redefined the very fucking meaning of the word. Now, part of this shift lies in the fact that Trump may be the chief hypocrite, but every single one of his political allies and supporters is fucking one too. You literally cannot support Trump or work alongside him and not be a fucking hypocrite. In fact, if there is one recognizable element of the Trump party's platform, it is collective weaponizing hypocrisy. Without the hypocrisy, there literally is nothing left. Before we decide what to do about the new turn in political hypocrisy, we first have to decide and understand it. And here are 4 key ways to changing somebody's mind. Now, 1, it's in your face. To say that the hypocrisy of Trump and his sycophants is flagrant, shameless, and extreme is to state the fucking obvious. Back in April of 2017, Chauncey DeVega had wrote an essay for Salon in which he called Trump's hypocrisy flagrant. The trouble is that when you used a word like flagrant to describe excessive Trumpist behavior in 2017, you ran out of the effective adjectives basically by 2022. Now, but the in-your-face style of Trumpist hypocrisy isn't just limited to the hypocrite in chief. Perhaps there's no better example of the mass approach to Trumpist hypocrisy than its contradictions over healthcare. One day, pro-Trump Republicans are freaking out over needing to wear a mask during a pandemic, and the next day are mandating control over a woman's body. One ad targeting the hypocrisy of the pro-life position pointed out that Republicans only care about policing women's bodies and not supporting them or their children. So we have both a spate of inconsistencies and a mass movement practicing them. But the additional in-your-face feature of Trumpist hypocrisy is the lack of shame. Now think, for example, of all those Trump-nominated members of the Supreme Court who blatantly misled the public during the confirmation hearings about their position on Roe v. Wade, but they showed zero remorse, embarrassment, or even concern that doing so was not just hypocritical, it was deliberately deceptive. Now, Trumpist hypocrisy is just there all the time, in your face and proudly on display, and they don't give a shit. Number 2, it's invisible. Here's where it gets really fucking weird, because while it's on full display, and openly all the time, it's also invisible. The difference is that some of us can see it, and some of us can't. Henry Farrell and Martha Finnemore argued back in 2017 on a Foreign Affair essay that it was a mistake to consider Trump a hypocrite, and Trump's no hypocrite, they claimed, but they described him as inconsistent rather than hypocritical. Hypocrisy requires a minimal degree of self-awareness, and they argued, as well as clear understanding of both one's own interests and of public norms. The point that they were trying to make was that Trump simply couldn't even recognize his own hypocritical behavior, which meant that he wasn't actually a true hypocrite, which he is. But here's the catch, and it explains why some of us see the hypocrisy and why those who practice it cannot. Farrell and Finnemore's point rests on the premise that hypocrisy depends on being aware of a moral compass and deliberately not using it. But that's the thing about the hypocrisy. Its moral compass tongue-tied. Its moral compass is its hypocrisy. Once you recognize that the issue here isn't failing to effectively compare one's actions to an ethical code, but rather embracing selfish, self-serving, irrational, inconsistent, and illogical behavior as an ethical code, then you get why those who practice it can't see it. Inside the Trump hypocrisy bubble, nothing that is done by them can be judged against an external ethics, and therefore they simply cannot be they possibly cannot be a hypocrite to them. For the Trumpists, now for the Trumpist hypocrite, everyone else who doesn't argue with you is the real hypocrite, but you never are. Sure, it's absolutely batshit crazy, and it's an ethical code that lacks anything resembling ethics, but that's how it works. Number 3, it's invincible. And in 2017, professors Emile Bruno, Nor Catelli, and Emily Falk had published a groundbreaking study on the power of revealing hypocrisy. Now, studying how communities commonly resort to collective blame after massive violence, like when individuals blame all the Muslims for acts of violence, of mass violence committed by a small group of Muslims, they tested a range of interventions that could be used to disrupt that habit. And what they found was that showing individuals that it was hypocritical to blame all Muslims for the acts of review, when they don't blame all Christians for the acts of review, was a highly effective tactic. Now, the catch, though, was that the study wasn't looking at Trumpist hypocrisy, but hypocrisy in general. And what's more important to note is that, although from the study, it's that for the average person, it is possible to become aware of one's hypocrisy and alter one's belief. And that simply isn't true in Trump land, because they're already, with them being inbred, they don't care. Now, Charette notes that one of the core problems with Trumpist hypocrisy is the fact that calling it out doesn't just make a difference. He points to a piece in the Philosophy and Politics blog called VIM that argues that the reason why calling out Trumpist hypocrisy doesn't matter is because charging a fascist with hypocrisy is especially pointless. Now, this is so because fascism requires that exposing its inconsistencies and incoherence has no effect on its adherents. And whether we want to use the fucking F word to describe Trump as hypocrites or not, we do have to argue that we do have to agree and argue that calling it out has made absolutely no difference whatsoever to its grasp on American society. Now, if you have any doubts, check out the work of Jordan Klepper, who has done brilliant work describing the absurdity of Trumpist hypocrisy. His recurring segment on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Jordan Klepper fingers the pulse, and it has him out in the field interviewing Trump sycophants and literally repeating their hypocrisy back at them. In every case, the interviewee hears Klepper ironically explain the hypocrisy, but then they respond by unironically repeating it back to him, and the contrast between Jordan Klepper cleverly exposes the hypocrisy, and the hypocrite happily and obviously owning it is stunning. As one viewer states, this would be so much funnier if it wasn't so fucking terrifying. Now, number 4, it is all there is. When you think about it, Trumpism doesn't just practice hypocrisy, it needs it. How else do you explain defending democracy by literally trying to destroy it? Whether attacking pizza or the vice president, This is a political ground in unethical inconsistencies and immoral rationality. Hypocrisy has now become the signature feature of Trumpian politics. In fact, every single party platform is ripe with it, but there is literally nothing else. It's becoming worse than that, because Trumpist hypocrisy has also overtaken most anti-Trump politics as well. In race after race this primary season, non-Trump candidates have literally defined themselves over and over and against Trumpist hypocrisy to the detriment of offering alternative policy platforms. It's not entirely clear how we escape the vicious cycle of constantly needing to respond to the latest hypocritical move of the Trump camp. It isn't wise to ignore it, but it's also problematic to let it take up the whole room. It sparks legitimate outrage, but it also sucks the air out of productive political engagement, and given the fact that signaling it isn't going to affect those who practice it, but giving it too much energy isn't tipping any political scales. It may well be that the most effective challenge to Trumpian hypocrisy comes from satire, like the Klepper segments that are highlighted above. And since satire's creative use of ironies is uniquely suited to revealing ironic behaviors, one excellent example is that Trumper Noah had offered a highly effective takedown of Trumpist media when he ran a tape of Foe covering Hillary Clinton, but paired it with the footage of Trump. And there is a real benefit to allowing comedians to be the ones to skewer the hypocrites. They are experts in irony, and they know the difference between the kind of inconsistency that sparks critique while getting a laugh and the kind that makes no sense. Now, even more importantly, they get that the best challenge to weaponize hypocrisy may well be to mock it, but since if there is one thing Trumpist hypocrites are worse at, is that they don't recognize their own hypocrisy, but it's taken a joke, and that's pretty fucking funny. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just as little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.